Hey guys, what's up? This is False Bulls 123, and welcome back to my channel. If you guys don't know, this is day 72, my daily quarantine vlogging challenge. So, I have a lot of things I collect. A lot of them I keep over on my bookshelf, mostly because I ain't got no place for them, and I'm a trash person. So, I don't believe I've shown you too many of my collections on, my channel. I did show you my rock collection previously, and I am going to do a few more collection videos in the future. But for today, I basically wanted to show you my coin collection. So, there's a name for coin collecting, one that I do not remember, and I don't feel like looking up. You can do it. You have the internet. Go you. But pretty much, it is a very common hobby, done by many, many people for a variety of reasons. Now, it's not a hobby that I'm particularly invested in, but over the years and times, I have collected a few interesting coins or tokens that I thought were, interesting enough to, put in a box and look at sometimes. So, if you're ready for more of my Goblin Core aesthetic, let's look at my shiny baubles. So as you can see here, I've separated my coins into three different categories. And so we're going to be looking at these all individually. One thing I think is really interesting about looking at one's currency is that it's a reflection of the culture that, these coins came from. We have people of importance on the faces and other national symbols, which bear some sort of historical or cultural significance to the people that, use them every day. So first up, we're going to be going to my uncommon American coins. So if you guys are not from America, you might not know sort of how our currency breaks down. Essentially, we have a few different denominations. The cent, which is 1/100th of a dollar. The nickel, which is 5 cents. The dime, which is 10 cents. The quarter, which is 25 cents. And then we have the more uncommon half dollar and dollar coins. So here is the first one we're going to be talking about today. This is a standard half dollar coin. As you can see, we have our state seal in the United States of America on the coin itself. And this is a picture of John F. Kennedy, who was, I don't remember which one of our presidents was, but essentially he lived in the 70s or 80s, can't quite remember. He was the first Catholic president, and he was also one of the 4 presidents that was assassinated during his term. So John F. Kennedy actually did a lot of really important, I guess, change in the country during the time period. And as presidents go, he's fairly well regarded. Let's see. So I'm going to be moving into my dollar coins. So there are quite a few different commemorative dollar coins, and the standard ones that you see is the Sacagawea golden dollar coin. Looks like this. So if you don't know, Sacagawea, or I believe it's also pronounced Sacagawea, I believe that's the correct pronunciation, was a Native American woman who helped Lewis and Clark in their journey to the West Coast. For those that don't know American history, essentially sometime during, I believe it was the late 17th century, but it might have been later. Essentially, we purchased the western half of America from France, from Napoleon. And basically, we have what was called this great expedition with these men named Lewis and Clark. They essentially hired Sacagawea to be their guide until they actually made it all the way to the West Coast. And it's actually a part of history that we learn in school. Here's another one. And so she is essentially one of the few women that are actually on the American coins. And I believe she's the only Native American woman that has been featured on our, I guess, currency. And as far as I know, I know American history, we don't really talk a lot about the contributions that indigenous people had in America, and I think that's kind of shitty. We do learn a lot about how we interacted with them. We learn about a lot of the issues. But I definitely think we could go into more of it. And Sacagawea is one of the few cultural heroes that, or I guess historical figures that are very well known in American, I guess, history and American culture. So we also have, Sacagawea is the face of the golden $1 bill coin, but we also will have commemorative ones featuring other American figures. So this is Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln is also featured on the cent, which is our lowest one, and then you have the Statue of Liberty right here. Then next up we have Andrew Johnson, not Jackson, Johnson, who I don't remember his historical contribution, but as we can see, the back face is the absolute same. And then we have James Monroe, who was one of the founding fathers. And so his likeness is also on these coins. So let's move those away. And let's get to the last coin that we actually have in this category. So this is probably one of the interesting ones I saw, mostly just because I had never really seen, this is the largest US coin I've ever really seen before. Generally, a golden one is about the size of a quarter, with the $half actually being generally the standard biggest coin. This is another commemorative $1 coin, and as you can see, compared to the gold coin and the $half, there is a noticeable size difference. So this one was from 1977. It features Eisenhower, who was one of our presidents and a vice president in general, if I remember correctly. And as you can see on the back, we have the eagle holding the olive branch, which is one of the basic symbols of the United States. But this is actually appearing to commemorate the moon landing. I also noticed that you can see some stars surrounding the eagle, and there appears to be 13 stars, obviously representing the 13 original states of the colonies. So moving on from a bit of American culture and history, we move on to tokens. Essentially, not every coin that exists has a legitimate cash value, as you can see. And so I've collected a few of them that are just kind of fun. These are $1 car wash tokens. You can put them in a machine and choose whether or not what type of soap you want to spray your car with. These are arcade tokens from the family. Oh, sorry. These are arcade tokens, and these are actually not from the Family Fun Center, which is in Central Point. Welcome to part 72 of Ryan pretending that you live in Medford and know local, geography. These are actually from Cinemark, which basically Cinemark is like this cinema brand or franchise, and the one in town is referred to as Tinseltown, which is actually, if I remember correctly, an old-timey nickname for Hollywood, but don't quote me on that because I am not a cinema historian. And the last up is just this branded Coca-Cola token, which I'm not exactly sure the origin or provenance of it, but I just I think I got it sometime in middle school, and I'm like, okay, that's cool, because just it said Coca-Cola on it. And even though I have a lot of Coca-Cola merch, and I talk about Coca-Cola a lot, not quite the biggest fan of it. So those are pretty much just my non-cash value coins, and just appreciate some ASMR while we're here. So let's get into some of my foreign coins, because I actually have, while I've never been traveling, I do have 9 coins from different countries, and I've just gotten those from relatives and other people that I've actually traveled with. Not traveled with, but they brought from their travels. And so I believe a few of these coins were actually from a friend of my grandmother's, who gave me some bills and coins as a thank you gift for helping her move after a truck slammed into her home. She lives on the coast now for cats. It's all real. It's a happy ending. So this is give me a second. This came out in 1967, and this is, let's see if I have it listed, a Philippine centimos, or I guess 50 cent or 50 note. And so, let's see, it says Lemempong centimos, and this actually features the face of Marcelo del Pilar, who, if I remember correctly, was a Spanish reformist, but do not quote me on that. And so then you can see here it says República in Filipinas, obviously the Republic of the Philippines with the crest, and just a ridged edge on the coin itself. So it's really interesting. I've never been to the Philippines, and I don't really think much about it as a country. Which sounds weird, but it's there's a lot of countries, and I'm just I don't really think a lot about just that specific area of the world a lot. And so I do have one thing I thought was just interesting was, I guess, sort of the centimos. The language is obviously Spanish, or at least it has the similarities to it, which, obviously since Philippines was once occupied by Spain, it makes sense that there is some similarities in their languages due to that cultural influence. And I think it's really interesting when you look at currency and stuff like that because you never really think about how history affects culture and stuff like that. Speaking of Spanish, I also have a few, let's see, coins from Mexico itself. So I'm going to start from, let's see, smallest in size to largest, but I'm pretty sure the denominations go the other way. So let's see. So this is a 10 centavos or centavos. I'm not quite sure like what the pronunciation is. And it appears like this came out in 1946. So this is probably one of my oldest coins that I own. And one thing I thought was interesting is that it has the seal of Mexico. So the eagle eating the snake on top of a cactus, which I don't remember what the term was called, but I do remember the story of the significance of the seal. Essentially, there was these essentially, if I remember correctly, it was the eagle eating the snake was an omen that essentially told these settlers to create this city. I can't remember the name of the city anymore because, sadly enough, Mexican history was not the biggest focus in my elementary school teaching, but we did discuss the significance of the symbol when I was in school. I just don't quite remember what it is anymore, and I feel really bad about that. The thing I thought was really interesting about the design was the inscription Estados Unidos Mexicanos, or the United States of Mexico, which I never really thought about that since mostly we just don't, in the States we just refer to it as Mexico, and we don't really, I guess, think about if that would be the full name of it. So I never really knew that was, the full name of their country. Kind of like how people don't say the Democratic Republic of Congo, they just say Congo. And so I thought that was a really fascinating thing. So here is, I believe, the $5 coin, which I thought was really interesting because I, didn't know that there was denominations like this. It was 1981. And the inscription said that this is a depiction of Quetzalcoatl, who is a feathered serpent from, the Aztec pantheon. I know he was an Aztecian god, but I'm not sure if, they consider it a full-fledged pantheon. And once again, we have this symbol there. Another interesting aspect is that there's actually an inscription on the rim of the coin itself, which says, let me see if I can see it. Yeah, so as you can see, here, you can actually see the inscription, and I'll read it out to you now that I get close to my face. It had been Independencia y Libertad, or Independence and Liberty, which is really interesting just because I don't really know that much about, I guess, Mexican culture and things like that. So it is really interesting to see this sort of aspects. This is my third coin, and this is 5 pesos or 5 pesos. 1972, you have this soul on the back, and I really should know who this person is. They definitely look very familiar, but I'm not that, I guess, well informed on Mexican history. And so while I definitely recognize the face, I don't remember the name. But I know that clearly they're on a coin, but I definitely know that obviously they have some historical significance. So I do apologize about that. Please feel free to inform me, though you really don't have to. It is my fault for, I guess, and sorry about that. Let me just touch things and make things, yeah, it's my own fault for not knowing that person for the person, but yeah. So the next ring of things is we're going to be moving into actually, so those are just sort of my I guess sort of, I don't know how to classify them, but like I said, we're going to be moving to coins from the various countries of the Commonwealth. So I was reading on Reddit one time, and it said that one of the interesting things is that since Queen Elizabeth has lived for so long and has been the face of and has had so many countries in the Commonwealth, you can actually see her age on the coin, which I thought was a really fascinating concept. And so I'm going to be moving through, let's see, each of these and to kind of show you that sort of thing. So first up, we start with a Canadian dime. So Canada uses the same sort of, I guess, currency denominations as we do. They have cents and dollars. This is, I'm having a little time reading because it's so small. 1986. And it has a schooner on it, which is a type of ship. No duh, Ryan. And I just showed you the same face. On the back, you have Elizabeth II and the inscription D.G. Regina. And I'm not sure what the significance of that is. But it's a very small coin. It's one of the smallest coins I have in the, wow, I can really say what's small in my collection. Next up, we have that was, I believe, a Canadian dime. This is a Canadian nickel. As you can see, it is 5 cents. This is from 1974, and it features a beaver. Interesting point of note is that beavers are obviously in both America and Canada, and is actually the state animal of Oregon. So the beaver is actually very similar to this depiction, is actually on our flag. Which, another fun fact is that Oregon is one of the only state flags that has a separate image for both the front and reverse of it. And in the same, it appears to be the same engraving or illustration, you also see Queen Elizabeth. One thing I thought was really interesting is that while it had different faces, the reverse of both the dime and the nickel are essentially the same. Which I guess in one hand, like, we have the seal on the back of most of our coins, but generally the facing reverses of American coins are usually separate and different based on denomination. This is the third coin I own that actually has Elizabeth's face on it, and this is from New Zealand, which, if you know, is also a Commonwealth country. It's from 2006. And it appears to be a butterfly of some kind, though I imagine that this is some sort of significant cultural art. Since I am not well versed in, I guess, New Zealand culture, I don't exactly know the significance of the imagery. However, it is very interesting. So moving on, we're going to be getting into sort of the two Asian coins that I have. Now, I do have a variety of paper yen in one of my books somewhere. Actually, hold on a second. As luck might have it... No, okay, I must have moved into a different book. Dang it, I thought I had it. Oh well. But essentially, I do have two coins which are from Asian countries. The first of this is the smallest coin I have. See how tiny it is? It is a 1967 Singapore nickel. So it has some sort of, looks like barley on it, and then it has a swan on the reverse side. And so it is, I love how tiny this is, but also of a coin is because it is very, very small. And I love how there's, like, all these different sizes and shapes and, I guess, designs for coins, which makes it really interesting. And this is a 1963 50 yen. So one thing I love about yen is that it has this little hole in the middle, which makes it a very distinctive shape. And then it has... I'm not exactly sure, like, what type of flower those are. I'm fairly certain those are not Sakura blossoms, but it has some sort of, like, floral design on the back. And so that's pretty much all of my coins. So guys, my foot's asleep, and I've mostly just been blabbing on about a bunch of coins whose cultures I don't understand. And on one hand, that's really sad, because that means that, I guess, as a cosmopolitan and enlightened person, I have failed. But on the other hand, I think it's really awesome to be able to collect things like coins or other pieces of artwork, because it allows us to experience a culture outside of our own, and to really appreciate some of the universal beauty that all humans create. I think one of the things I love about traveling, about just like learning about different cultures, is that every culture has a very unique and vibrant sort of expression of art and literature and history. And it's all, like, and because of its history, because of the influences from other countries and cultures that it has, you really see how it affects a lot of the small, I guess, aspects of its society. And so I think that's really interesting. I really wish that, like, as a person, as an individual, that I would be able to travel. That I'd be able to physically go to other countries and learn, like, about all these things and experience things firsthand and be very worldly as a person. Though I know that, I guess, just given my life, given the opportunities and advantages that I have in my life, it is a very difficult and sometimes impossible, I guess, desire. I want to travel. I always want to, go to foreign countries, eat foreign food, I guess, just speak the language and experience a life outside of my own. But I know that I've really not been born into a position of advantage where going to these places and having those opportunities and, I guess, abilities, it's not something that I've always really had the capability or possibility to do. And I think that's, like, one thing that I try to, I guess, break myself out of that mindset, that I do have the ability to travel, even though sometimes the ability is much more costly than I can really afford in any sense of the word. But I think it's really nice that, even though one isn't able to physically travel, one is able to, I guess, mentally travel, in the sense, through, like, the learning of other people's cultures, and through, I guess, the consumption or appreciation of other people's cultures. This is a bit of a side note, but I thought, like, it is part of the conversation that I like to have and I want to have. Was I was actually listening to a book by Jima Alo called So You Want to Talk About Race, where she was discussing the concept of cultural appropriation. And everyone's like, oh my goodness, cultural appropriation, that, like, totally sucks. Why can't we just, like, steal people's culture and, like, bastardize it? And I, like, I think there is definitely a fine line between cultural appreciation and cultural appropriation. And you can argue that anything that a predominating culture does to appreciate or consume another culture is appropriation. And you can also say that, like, sometimes people want to, like, go to another culture and experience it and have a fond memory of, like, the value of that culture. And I think that there is arguments for many different things and many different applications. And so one thing like, obviously, as a cook, one thing that I'm very aware of and cognizant of is the effects of, like, cooking other people's culture, consuming other people's cuisines, and utilizing that in your own food, and whether or not that is more detrimental to the cultures that you're trying to just show your love for than it is beneficial. And one thing I thought was real, she was talking about in, like, the chapter, where that she goes to this airport, I don't remember which one, and she sees this, like, restaurant, and so from the name of it and from sort of, like, the way that it's being branded and advertised, she assumed that it was a Ethiopian restaurant, which I thought was very, very fascinating. So one of the things that we actually did get to try in culinary school was that we had a international segment. It was our second quarter, and essentially I wish it was longer, but we did manage to get a good grasp on a lot of different styles. That essentially we spent a good portion of that quarter essentially going through and cooking from many, many different cuisines and many, many different cultures, and discussing sort of the fundamental basics and the philosophies behind those cooking styles, which I think is very important. There are so many different ways that people cook, and it's really important to be able to have that knowledge and experience, and to really draw off many of the different cooking ideas that many cultures have perfected and maintained. And so, while it was incredibly short and incredibly sparse for just the absolute variety and many, many, many different cultures and cuisines out there, we did have a very small portion that really delved into African cooking. And very piecemeal, we only were able to do a few dishes from, like, a few different countries from the area. But one thing I really loved about this few African dishes that we were able to try was the absolute variety and the absolute with the taste. It was such a vibrant and flavorful, I guess, sort of style of cooking. And so two that I really loved was Moroccan pastilles, which are essentially this type of pulled chicken pot pie that's wrapped in puff pastry, essentially. And it was fantastic. It was something that ever since I've had it, I've wanted to make it again. And another really interesting one was something called injera, which is essentially a fermented crepe. Best way to describe it. Essentially, it's this fermented dough we have, fermented for about 3 days before we cooked it, and then you essentially cook it as a crepe, and it's a type of bread, and it's actually very interesting. It's a little bit it's almost like a sourdough crepe. It's sort of the closest cultural, I guess, description that I can really give you. And so it was a really, there was, like, so many, like, little dishes like that were so fascinating, and it was just such an interesting and vibrant cuisine. And there was, like, all these different cultures and all these different cuisines that have these amazing, diverse, dishes that a lot of people in the States just would not know about, since we have such a different history when it comes to agriculture and animal husbandry and just staple foods in general, which I'm not going to get into, because describing how a country's culture, or how just a culture in general, cuisine's culture, A culture is cuisine, that's the best term, since obviously culture isn't necessarily defined by nationality or one demographic. But essentially, defining a culture's cuisine is very complicated due to many different aspects, such as religion, history, and I guess availability of agricultural and animal husbandry. But we're not going to get into that. But basically, a lot of different African cuisines are super fucking fantastic and amazing, and it's they're really good. And so it's she's just oh my goodness, Ethiopian food freaking rocks. And I'm just I absolutely agree. It is such a great cuisine. And so she gets there, and it ain't Ethiopian food. It's American food, but it's just got some tacky leopard print, Ottomans. And she's just well, this is smart. And I'm just and so she describes it, but it's basically, it's not, and she basically describes her expectations and her wish for a diverse cultural foodscape, and how this is basically it's a slap in the face. And from the way she describes it, and the way she really talks about her feelings about it, I can immediately definitely understand where she's coming from. Which I'm good, I'm not I guess a monster or something, but it's just I think the thing that was a really great point was that it's not so much just the absolute want to, I guess. It's not so much the want to, have somebody from an outside culture consume, I guess, the byproduct of your culture, but it's much somebody taking sort of the elements or the visual motifs of your culture and appropriating them into their own. And I think that's a really good point, is that if somebody wants to learns a traditional form of dance, or I guess something you can definitely say that you don't want them to because that diminishes your culture. But the main issues are really when someone takes something that's sacred or very important and uses it as a gaudy fashion statement, which I think is really the main issue of cultural appropriation. And I'm not really sure why we were getting on this topic, but I just, I was talking about cultures, I was talking about travel, I thought that was a really important thing to talk about, because as an American, I guess I really shouldn't define it as my nationality, but as an individual, I have an absolute love for many different cultures and cuisines in the world, and being able to sort of experience another culture through the cuisine by understanding how the food affects the day-to-day life and learning about that is something that has brought me a lot of immense joy. One thing I love to learn, to appreciate other people's culture, to appreciate other people's lives, is be able to sit down and understand how their food is created and how their food sort of affects their social situations. And being able to cook other people's cuisines is really a way that I can actually connect and emphasize with other people. And so I really appreciate being able to have that ability. But as a cook, I also have to consider that if I make these people's traditional cuisine, if I make their traditional food, did this diminish or stop people who are of those cultures, of those demographics, from being able to succeed? Am I sort of like an invasive weed hogging the landscape, which is traditional food? And if I'm trying to make it, am I being true and honest to the intent and purpose of this food? Or am I, as a cook, sort of bastardizing or, I guess, localizing the food in a way that is not true with its traditions? And so, this is getting a bit off track from, a coin collecting video, but, one of my videos, ever exactly on point. But basically, in that sense, whenever I am making a dish that is not culturally my own, which is not from a, culture that I belong to, I do try my best to make sure that it is very traditional, that it is taking very strongly from the beliefs and customs that this dish was created in, and that I try to make it to its most true, formal, and correct way. Because to make somebody else's dish is a matter of respect, and if I do it incorrectly, or if I do it in a way that is antithetical to the cuisine and to the culture itself, I have dishonored that dish and dishonored that culture in a very deep and wrong way. So, anyway guys, that was just kind of a bit personal conversation about cultural appropriation and whether or not appreciating people's cultures is, I guess, appropriative. And so, there you go. Deep shit about a coin collecting video. That's what you get on my channel. Anyway, guys, I'm going to shut the fuck up now because I've been talking way too long. And I hope you have a good day, Wash your hands, tell your loved ones you love them, live your best life. And until then, this is False Bulls 123, and I'm signing off.